Here is Chapter 3, Part 2 of Homeless Bird. We reached Varanasi late in the afternoon. The city in all its confusion seemed too large for us. It was several minutes before we knew which way to turn. We pushed past crowds of beggars. Sasur paused to drop coins into their cups, for the giving of alms brings one much credit with the gods. He clutched the address of his old friend, Mr. Lal, a Brahmin scholar, who had invited us to stay with him. Sasur found 2 bicycle rickshaws. After bargaining with the rickshaw-wallas, settled Hari and Sasur in one rickshaw and directed me to join her in the second one. The streets were crowded with motorcycles, automobiles, bicycles, and horse-drawn tongas. People clung to buses like swarms of bees on a branch. Cows and dogs and goats wandered in and out of the traffic. I even saw a camel. Harry's face was flushed, and like me, he was looking about in amazement. "Look there," he whispered hoarsely. In this city of 15,000 shrines, each shrine was more splendid than the next, but he was pointing to the great mosque of Aurangzeb, where the city's Muslims worshipped. Its 8 towers were like lanterns suspended from the sky. Just before we turned off onto a narrow street, we caught a glimpse of the golden temple of Vishwanath and the great river itself, Ganges. "How soon will we go?" Hari asked in a weak voice. "When you are rested, Hari," Sasur said. Harry closed his eyes and made no reply. His silence broke my heart. All of Harry's sullenness and temper were gone, and without them Harry seemed to be disappearing. Mr. Lal and his wife greeted us warmly. They were elderly and very stately. I was not introduced as Harry's wife. I believe they took me for his sister. I wondered if Harry's parents were ashamed to admit before this dignified man that they had married so young and so sick a son to get money. Mrs. Lal brought us a meal of dal and chapatis. Mr. Lal brought a small jar of water. With great ceremony he held it out to Harry. In his solemn voice he said, "From the Ganges." We all watched, holding our breath and hoping for some miracle where Harry drank the water, but there was no miracle that we could see, only Harry suffering a new attack of coughing. Though everyone was eager to take Harry to the river, he was too weakened from the long journey to go. Just before we lay down to sleep, Mrs. Lal gave Sas some mustard oil and camphor to rub on Harry's chest. The next morning he seemed a little better. After a quick meal of tea and lentils, we set off. 2 men were hired to carry Harry's cot. With Mr. Lal and Sas and Sasur, we began our pilgrimage to the Golden Temple. We could hardly move, for, like us, half the city was making its way to the river. There were women wearing saris the color of jewels, many of them woven with gold. There were holy men whose faces were covered with ashes and who wore nothing at all. There were Jains with masks tied around their faces so they wouldn't accidentally breathe in an insect and so kill a loving thing, which was against their religion. There were Sikhs from the Punjab who never cut their hair but tucked it all up under their turbans. In their saffron robes, sadhus, holy men, were everywhere. They carried begging bowls, and the air was heavy with their chants. When I looked into the temples, I could see the holy sadhus sitting in long rows, bare-chested, their heads shaven, holding sacred lamps and accompanying their chanting with bells. Pigeons fluttered in and out of the temple's open doorways. I looked at Harry to see if he was astonished as I at such sights. When I caught his eye, a faint smile came over his face. I thought he might have been telling me that I had him to thank for so wondrous a trip. At last we came to the golden temple of Vishwanath. A long, wide flight of steps led down to the river. With the 2 men holding Harry's cot between them, we made our way down the ghat, pushing through the crowds. Harry had to hang on to the cot to keep from slipping off. Along the river's edge, women were scrubbing clothes and even washing their pots and pans. Barbers were cutting hair. There were dogs and a cow wandering about. 2 boys were flying kites. We saw people with every kind of illness. Some could not walk. Others were as thin and wasted as Harry was. Some had terrible sores and deformities. I could hardly bear to look at all the misery. Yet the expressions on the faces of the sick were not sad. They were not hopeful, but they were peaceful. Even Harry looked more comfortable and content. The crowds on either side of us and behind us swept us forward. Ahead of us was Ma Ganges. As the pilgrims reached the greenish-brown river, they walked right into the water. They faced the morning sun and began their pujas, reciting their prayers and making their offerings of flowers or grain. The saris of the waiting women floated on the surface of the water like the petals of pond lilies. Beyond the pilgrims, hundreds of small boats skimmed over the river. And we'll stop there, and then there'll be one more section for you to listen to.